Tonight, the government plans to introduce a mandatory digital ID card. Is it the answer to the migration crisis? Do the public support it? The so-called Brit Card would be used as proof of someone's right to live and work in the UK, but will it also open up old wounds around civil liberties and privacy? Also tonight, the Prime Minister says he's not going to comment on Andy Burnham's personal ambitions, as the publicity blitz from the Greater Manchester Mayor fuels speculation about his leadership hopes. Independent thinking. Nigel Farage meets with the Governor of the Bank of England, but is he planning a Trump-style assault on central bank policy? And as Barack Obama packs audiences into arenas in London and Dublin this week, we look at the contrasting rhetorical styles of the president and his predecessor. Can our panel make politics hub great again? Yes, they can. Salma Shah and Hannah Bardell will be with us for the next hour. It's Thursday. I'm Darren McCaffrey, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. A very good evening. Tonight, I want to start talking about myself. Well, my 16-year-old self, and please do not judge me too harshly, because 20 years ago, I actually sat in the audience of the BBC's Question Time programme, and I got called to ask a question. And word for word, it genuinely went like this. Does the panel think that ID cards are an infringement on civil liberties or necessary to combat terrorism, fraud and illegal immigration? Now, thankfully, for all of you, and indeed me, the video footage has been lost, but it was the debate of the day back in the early noughties, and one that very much divided the country.
That's why we propose to introduce identity cards to use the technology of tomorrow, biometric cards with retina scans and fingerprints to ensure that we better identify and control who's in the country legally and who's not, that people are who they say they are, and those who have the right to use public services get those rights, and those who don't can't. If elected, therefore, for a third term, we will reintroduce the ID cards bill as soon as parliamentary time allows, and I challenge the Conservatives to support us this time round.
Now, of course, ultimately that didn't happen, not least of all because of the coalition government. But today, under a new Labour government, this decades-old debate is starting to rage again, with the Prime Minister expected to announce plans for a compulsory UK-wide digital ID scheme. And the reason is it's all about clamping down on illegal migration and stopping rogue bosses from hiring staff who should not be here. Many, including the French, have argued for a long time that our lack of ID cards have made us a soft touch. But this will be, and will start, no doubt about this, a pretty fierce debate. Many might even argue it could make the problem worse, creating a two-tier society. What if millions of people refuse to comply, or that it's simply not very British? But also, has the debate moved on in the last 2 decades? Most of us now have one of these. A mobile phone, a smartphone. It means that when you walk around, you've got lots and lots of your personal information on your phone that we readily give away to government bodies and to private companies. Effectively, has technology outpaced this age-old argument? Either way, be in no doubt about this, it is a massive move by the government, one which will be heavily opposed, and one that, despite the government's big majority, it simply cannot guarantee will definitely happen. A bit like Tony Blair found out in the early noughties. Let's bring in our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, to talk more about this. Sam, do you agree? It's a big move by the government?
It is. It's fascinating. I think that was... the differences between now and when Tony Blair ultimately failed to bring in ID cards, and one of the reasons why I think there's a greater chance of this actually being a success for Keir Starmer rather than ending in failure as it did for Tony Blair first time around. As you say, the digital environment has changed everything. And what's really interesting about all the briefings about a digital ID card today is that it is all aimed at workers, about having a form of identification that allows you to show that you have the legal right to work, particularly if you come from overseas. And that's the context that Keir Starmer has, and I think that's the driving force behind this idea. Immigration is the public's top concern. There is a fear that the ability of employers Some, by not doing rigorous enough checks, have allowed people to take jobs when they shouldn't be able to, and that's a pull factor for people coming to the UK. That's pretty key. There will be opposition, but if I'm being honest, Darren, you have had over the last few weeks some pitch rolling for this. You had Shabana Mahmood tell me on her first day as Home Secretary she was in favour of it, and Pat McFadden has given newspaper interviews saying as much. And there wasn't a huge outcry from the Labour benches at that point about this policy. Now, Nigel Farage has come out tonight and said that he is thoroughly against it. He thinks it's illiberal. So there is clearly going to be loud opposition. But given the immigration context, given, as you say, much of our personal data is readily available, and given it's basically to prove that you have the right to work rather than necessarily something that a policeman can stop you on a street corner and demand, as far as we know at this stage, it does feel like a slightly different proposition.
Do we know where the Labour Party is with this? Because we do now have the Lib Dems reform and the Conservatives essentially opposed to it. There'll be definitely opposition in the House of Lords. Arithmetic-wise, you seemingly suggest it will get through, but could it be a little bit tricky? Is the entire Labour Party kind of behind it?
Well, look, it's early days. The voices that have come out against it are people like Nadia Whittome, very much from the left of the party. If it remains just that caucus that opposes it, then it'll sail through. I think that the party is extremely aware that, and the leadership is extremely aware that migration is their biggest priority. I think one of the complications, though, for Keir Starmer is a different one. It was only a year ago that his government opposed exactly this policy. It wasn't in the manifesto. Yvette Cooper and the former business secretary, now Chief Whip, Johnny Reynolds, were absolutely firm that it wouldn't happen. There is a sense that they have lurched into having to adopt this idea because of the challenge that migration has posed. And as ever, there are lots of details that underlie this plan that we don't know the answer to. If you remember, the thing that really scuppered Tony Blair was the big database that would have to be constructed in order to make the system work. The technical details of how this would work has really moved on. A lot of the data is on our phones. Is it, for instance, essentially just a front door that latches onto some of the existing ways of identifying who we are, provided by third-party organisations? That's what the former Peter Carl told me a year ago. So there are lots of different ways of doing it. But at the moment, I don't think we know how this will shake down politically, simply because we don't know all the details. OK, Sam, as always, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates, our Deputy Political Editor, joining me here in the studio. Let's get more reaction now, though, and turn to a Labour MP, Joe White, who also chairs the Red Wall Caucus. Joe, very good evening to you. You're in favour of this scheme?
Yes, I have been for many years, and even during Tony Blair's time, I thought it was a very positive thing. It's something that my constituents support. I have surveyed them a few times on this, and every time in this summer it was over 74% thought digital ID is a good thing. And I've been out to Estonia with 4 other MPs just 3 weeks ago to look at how they've introduced digital ID in Estonia and how effective and how supported it is by the people who live there.
OK, so there is support for it, Joe. I suppose the question, obvious one, is why? Why are you in favour of this?
The first argument, it gives you access to, you can use it to give you access to public services. So you can use it to go to your local hospital, to register your children into school. And it means that if people are entitled to be here, for example, and get a job, you have to show your ID card. And so it's about identifying yourself as a British citizen. But having an ID card...
Sorry to interrupt. But fundamentally, this is about migration, is it? I mean, people have still got access to public services today without ID cards. So why do you think it's going to be the game changer, I suppose, when it comes to migration?
French have already said that the pull factor in this country is that people can get a job without having to show ID, and therefore it has opened the door far too easily to legal working. And so we need to disincentivise people coming to this country. Having a requirement to show an ID card at that point of employment is a critical way to stop that trail of people coming across into the UK. That's a number one reason. But But access to public services, for example, if a French person comes into this country and they can access the NHS if they're ill, and there's no payment system. But if we have to show an ID card, we can actually show that we're entitled to use the NHS. But there's other things that could be contained on it. For example, you can have your health records. At the moment, if you go into A&E, they don't know your health records. You can have your dental records. You can, this is what they have in Estonia, you can do your tax return. If you have a baby, you can register the birth of a baby. You want to get married, you can use your ID card to get married.
Is this all on your phone, Joe, from your understanding?
In Estonia, you can do it on your phone, or you can use a traditional card, which with the as you have on your passport with the icon on it. But most people are switching to use a phone.
And are you comfortable with? I mean, I know lots of this information is clearly held by different government bodies. You know, obviously the DVLA, for example, have got lots of details about us, and other government bodies, the NHS does as well. But it all been held in one place. I mean, look what's happened over the last couple of weeks and months in this country around cyber attacks. Isn't that concerning?
I think I agree. That's a concern, and this is a discussion that we had with people with government in Estonia. And what they do is that different sections of your own data is stored in different places, and their biggest threat is Russia. And so they've had to ensure that their systems are very, very secure indeed. And I think we have lessons to learn from them. But because you have for example, your health data stored at one place, and then your driving license data stored on a different server, then it's very, very difficult to access multiple sets of personal data. And splitting that up helps control it. The Estonians tell me they have 3 pillars. They have confidentiality, availability, and integrity. And I think that's essential for us to adopt if we're going to introduce an ID system.
Just finally, Joe, just on the principal argument, you're kind of, because there is a principal argument about this, isn't there, around what information it should have on you, what it can demand of you at any given time. You're comfortable on a principal basis, the government essentially holding all this information and being able to ask you to present it at any given time. I mean, that's quite a step change from our understanding of the relationship between government and individuals in this country.
People who are here with a visa, they already are required to use an ID card already. So that the system already works. What I think is that this is what they do in Estonia, is people are able to control what data people can see about them. For example, if they've had a mental health illness and they've had medication for that, they can choose to hide that information from a GP if they wish to. So people have absolute control on what data is available for government or organisations to see on their ID card, because they can access it personally and have absolute control over it.
OK, Joe, we appreciate your time this evening. Joe White there, a Labour MP. Well, joining me now in the studio is Akiko Hart, the Director of Liberty, the UK's largest civil liberties organisation. A very good evening to you. I'm going to make an assumption here that you oppose what the government seem likely to announce tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right. So what we're hearing is that the government is proposing to announce a mandatory digital ID system, the Brit Card, in order to reduce irregular migration. But it won't. There is no evidence that it would. Because what we've seen in countries like Greece and Germany, which have large underground economies, which have irregular migration, and which also have mandatory ID, is that there is no correlation between having mandatory ID and reducing irregular migration. But what we do know is that mandatory digital ID excludes people. It excludes people who are digitally excluded, people who might live in poverty, or people who may be older. There are 2 million people in this country who are not online. And if this came into play, they would not be able to access services.
Joe seems to be suggesting that it may well be based on the Estonia model, which involves, potentially for some people, maybe older people, a physical, actual cards. But even if it is on the phone, I don't know if you saw what I said at the top, but I mean, we have got used to people holding a lot of information about us on this, which largely has been protected. And by the way, if you've got one of these, I mean, Google probably know way more about me than the government does. So why the concern about that?
Absolutely, and the world has absolutely changed in the last 20 years. And like you, I'm very online, my life is on my phone, and I may find this a little bit easier in terms of my day-to-day life. But when you're designing policies like this, you also have to think about the people it may exclude or harm. And there I come back to the 2 million people who are not, who are not online and who wouldn't be able to access services. To your point, there may be a way of doing this well, but any kind of digital ID system to work, to be kind of rights respecting, needs to be designed with those kind of rights-based principles at its heart. And critically, it has to be opt-in, not mandatory.
Well, but the point is, though, that we're actually an outlier on all of this. I mean, France has got ID cards. I used to live in Belgium. They've got ID cards. I don't think anyone views most Western European countries as kind of repressive regimes. I mean, if you can be a free French citizen and have an ID card, why not a British one?
Because I'm going back to the government's announcement here, and what the government wants to do, what
they're
saying...
So you're not in principle against this? You're just waiting to see potentially what the detail is?
Well, we need to see what the detail is. We would, in principle, oppose any mandatory digital ID card system or physical ID card system. It's that mandatory bit that I think is really, really important. But the government's announcement is about introducing digital ID cards in order to reduce irregular migration, and it will not. There is no evidence that it would do so.
Well, but the French have said for a long time that they think that one of the reasons migrants don't stay in France and come here is because there is a black market for people able to get work, essentially, because you only have to provide paperwork here, which can clearly be easily forged or ignored. I mean, clearly, if the system was implemented properly, I think it's fair to say it might work. It might. I mean, if people can access the workforce, surely that would act as a deterrent, no?
Well, in France, there is absolutely, as you say, mandatory ID, and there is also a huge underground economy, and there is irregular migration.
OK. Akiko, thank you very much indeed. It is a debate that I'm sure you and others will be involved in quite a lot over the next couple of months and years. And that issue of ID cards are almost certain to feature, of course, in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the New Statesman Associate Political Editor Rachel Cunliffe and the columnist and lead writer at The Times, that's Sebastian Payne. OK, let's bring in our duo for this evening. Former Special Advisor in the Conservative Government, Salma Shah, and the former SNP MP, Hannah Bardell. Good evening to you both.
Good evening.
Let's start on this issue of ID cards. We're back again having this same debate. Obviously, the Conservative Party are opposing it. What's your take, Salma?
I'm actually quite pro-ID cards, and I'm pro-digital ID. I would like to see biometric elements to it. But I don't dispute, what we've heard from Liberty is a privacy organisation, that actually it does have to be designed with rights in mind. I don't think that those two things are in conflict. I think we have to understand, actually, what are the possibilities. And the government said it's about migration, but actually there are use cases, to use, tech speak, around welfare, around the NHS, around other services and systems that could actually help our public services. So I think we've got to keep in mind that there are huge positives as well, and not be detracted by the negatives, but ensure that we are finding a plan to work through the negatives. It's not just rights either. It's about how we use that data in order to ensure that actually it's working for the individuals that have the ID card and not just for the state. So, for example, the idea that anybody can look up your system if they've got the right access, that has to be controlled. The idea that there is a pseudonymised data, not anonymised, pseudonymised data, that actually the links between data...
What's that? You have to explain that to me.
It's where you can't link back somebody's ID because you've got lots of data sets that will essentially be able to find you, even if it is anonymised in some way. So there are lots of things.
Every day's a school day.
I mean, I don't claim to be a data expert. I'm sure there's many people watching that will correct me, and I'm happy if they do. But the idea is that the best shouldn't be the enemy of the good. And I think that's where my position is.
OK. Hannah?
Not a fan. I think this is a reboot that we could do without, and I think it's interesting that it's coming at a time when we've got some of the former Blair advisors coming back into the government. It's like the Labour government have run out of ideas, so they're going back to one of their worst ones. You've got to remember when this plan was cancelled, when the coalition government came in, it cost the nations of the UK something in the region of £4.5 billion. And certainly the estimates I've seen, and obviously we haven't seen the plans yet, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, but there's talks of anywhere between £5 to £11 billion for implementation, and then £1 billion every year just to run the system. Now, to put that in context, you are talking about 200,000 social care workers or 100,000 teachers or nurses. Now, this is obviously some kind of plea to reform voters. I'm pretty sure most of the people out there that are thinking about voting for reform would rather have
the money's an issue. Money's always an issue in government, and governments would say this is a long-term investment, all that sort of stuff. But on this, if it does help control illegal migration, by the way, France, a neighbour of ours, suggesting it will, and they have got ID cards. Surely that's a good thing then, no?
Well, first of all, as we have just heard from the head of Liberty, it doesn't necessarily do that. And also, it goes back to the very premise of the argument on migration. We have a flatline, declining birth rate in many parts of the UK. We have a whole generation of baby boomers.
This is aimed at people who are working in our economy who should not be here or in jobs. This is not about people coming over here to work.
Yeah, but our economy wouldn't function without migrants.
But often those people are exploited, and I think this is one of the things that is under reported, if I can term it that way, is that if you are irregular and you are being asked to work for cash in hand, quite often you don't have the same rights, you don't have access to healthcare by virtue of the fact that you're an irregular migrant. You are more vulnerable to exploitation. So I think you also have to recognise that this could be helping a lot of people that might be in a dire situation.
I think it's important to remember that people, I know it's a term that we use, irregular migration. These are human beings. These are people that have come to the UK, most of them, to work, to contribute. And we know, because of the results of Brexit, our economy cannot function without those migrants.
Well,
and we are in a we're going to be in a situation.
This is a slightly different issue about. people come here and they get visas.
They're linked, right? Because this policy is about targeting a particular issue that has been inflamed by reform, and it's a it's a dead cat.
Let's look at the politics as we can, because obviously lots of the major parties, I think all of the major parties, Conservatives, Reform, Lib Dems have come out this afternoon and said, we're not going to oppose this. Is this a surefire win, do you think, for Starmer? He's got a big majority, obviously.
Well, I think the parties can say what they want. The win is going to be if Starmer is going to deliver it in a way. No big project like this is going to be without its hiccups. But if the government can deliver this policy and people actually start seeing the net effect of it, they start feeling that their public services are working better for them. They don't have to go to the doctors and tell 3 different people the same thing over and over again because they've got a digital ID and something comes up, either via the NHS app or through their own medical records that they've given their GP access to. I think if you start seeing that kind of improvement, then that is the win for the government. It's irrelevant what the other political parties say at this point.
I think our public services would be a lot better served with more investment, not an ID card.
OK, well, we've begun this debate. I promised it's going to go on for a long time. And I think we are going to hear an announcement from the Prime Minister tomorrow, and obviously we'll be across the detail here on Sky News. Well, that late-breaking story this evening about ID cards came, frankly, as a welcome distraction for the government from another pretty big question about the future of the Prime Minister himself. The Labour Mayor for Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, has claimed that some Labour MPs want him to challenge Sir Keir Starmer for the party leadership. And despite a number of hurdles, not least of all is the fact that he's not even an MP, among other things, may well mean he might not get there. But he's certainly, seemingly, I would suggest, making manoeuvres. Let's listen to what Andy Burnham had to say a little earlier today.
I was asked a direct question by a journalist, and I gave an honest answer. And obviously that's been reported today. MPs were in touch with me. But let me also give an honest explanation of what I said to those MPs. It's not up to me. It's not my decision. That's a matter for you, for the party in Parliament. And also I said to them, and it's got to be about more than a personality contest. The Tories were just constantly going through this at the latter end of the time that they were in government. It's got to be about a plan, a proper plan for the country and a proper plan to beat reform. And I think that's the big issue in front of us.
Well, we also heard from the Prime Minister today, the one that is actually in Downing Street, that is Sir Keir Starmer. He did a series of interviews with the regional media, some of whom, unsurprisingly, wanted to ask him about Andy Burnham.
I'm not going to get drawn into commenting on the personal ambitions of the Mayor.
But why are your MPs asking him to challenge you?
Well, I can't answer a question like that.
Is it because you're failing to communicate a message and he's more successful in doing that?
Well, look, again, I'm not going to get drawn into commenting on the Mayor's personal ambitions. That's a matter for him, not a matter for me.
Well, speaking to our podcast, Electoral Dysfunction today, Baroness Harriet Harman, of course, a former Labour deputy leader, warned that this comes at Keir Starmer's most difficult time.
This was always going to be the moment of maximum danger. But I think that what people want is for Keir Starmer to succeed. And they don't want, I think, at this point, the turbulence of a leadership challenge.
Well, Salma and Hannah are still with me. Hannah, I mean, it's just quite blatant, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, he's not even trying to do it kind of,
subtly or under the radar.
or anyway.
Yeah.
It's just, he's kind of essentially going for it.
Yeah, I mean, fair play to him. He was asked a direct question, he gave a direct answer, and you don't get that often out of politicians. So I think he's been very open about it. I think Harriet Harman's right. It comes at a really difficult time. It feels like Labour have staggered out of the gates as soon as they won that election. It was such a thumping majority. But I think the way they have performed since the election is very symptomatic of why they won the election, was because the opponents and their opposition were so weak. And they're now in that situation where they've had one PR disaster after another. My sense is that most people would like to see Angela Rayner in number 10, certainly those on the left. She's obviously out of the game for a while. I wouldn't rule out her coming back. But it says something very significant that you're less than 2 years after a general election and you're so fed up of your leader that you're turning to someone that isn't even an MP.
You know what this reminds me a little bit of? Is Boris Johnson. And I say this because I've been to many and had been to many Conservative Party conferences back in the day when David Cameron was Prime Minister, and who would turn up?
Yeah.
Boris Johnson, and he would be surrounded by the media, he would hold a speech in a hall which would be rammed with supporters. We're probably going to see that next week with Andy Burnham in Liverpool.
Darren, to be honest, I felt like you should have given me a trigger warning before showing me those clips, because I feel like I lived that for a decade, in the sort of remit of the Conservative Party. So we see this kind of thing all the time. You have ambitious politicians, they see a weakness in their leadership, they decide that they're going to go for it. But I will say, Boris Johnson had a lot of false starts before he actually became Prime Minister. And, he had to see off at least 2 PMs before he got there. So I would just be cautious if I was advising Andy Burnham today about when he's deciding to go and whether he starts getting people's hopes up and then decides actually he's not going to go for it. I think that's going to be a lot worse. But also, let's look at where is the Labour Party going to be? What are the decisions that are going to need to be made? And is he going to get a parliamentary seat, which is the critical mechanism that will allow him to run?
It does seem like it's kind of Downing Street or bust, because if he goes for that by-election and doesn't win, it's essentially all over, isn't it? But Hannah, we have the reason also in part, it's not just personal ambition, I think, on Andy Burnham's part, though that's almost certainly there, is because I'm sure there are people in the Labour Party thinking, they're looking at the opinion polls. I think there's a more in common one out today showing that, Andy Burnham would be more popular than Keir Starmer in Downing Street, and would be better able, particularly to hold on to the north of England at the next election for Labour. And given where the polls are, that sort of stuff starts to matter, even if we're still years and years away from a general election.
Yeah, and there'll be, I think there is always a sense of duty. For anybody that wants to go into politics, no matter how ambitious, there will be a sense of duty. And perhaps Andy Burnham feels like, well, look, if we're in that much of a mess and I know I'm popular, I'm going to, to save Labour's chances of winning at the next election or having any chance of beating Reform, because they still are pretty far ahead, then perhaps he feels like he's doing the right thing. But again, it goes back to that fundamental question of, the state that they've got themselves into, and instead of focusing on some of the biggest issues, the cost of living crisis, the levels of debt that we've got in the UK, the levels of poverty, we're talking about internal politics, and it feels like navel-gazing, and it's a kind of classic Westminster storm, isn't it?
Well, into that, I mean, we heard just from Harriet Harman there, but we've heard a lot of Labour MPs, at least privately, saying, Andy, pipe down, go away, this is not what we need. But in saying that, not to be Machiavellian about this, it's the way he's doing it that I'm most intrigued about, because there's the old adage of the man who wields the knife never gets the post, but also, I don't know, I come back to my question about it's not particularly subtle, or it doesn't seem particularly, dare I say, well thought through. He just seems to have kind of decided, I'm just going to go for it.
Yeah, it seems very oddly reactive, and I can't work out, if you're looking at it from the outside, can't quite work out what the strategy is. But there's something that Hannah just said that I want to go back to, which is the sense of duty. You know, I'm old enough to remember the days where loyalty was how you displayed your sense of duty to the nation.
Yeah.
And if there's something wrong with the Labour Party, he's a Metro Mayor that has his own mandate and authority, then he should be considering how to support the government that has these enormous challenges. It's the job of the opposition and the opposition parties to hold the Prime Minister to account.
Well, there's certainly a lot of opposition within Labour at the moment.
Well, yeah.
OK, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. You're watching the Politics Hub here on Sky News. Up next, we're going to be talking about Nigel Farage, because he's actually visited the Bank of England governor today. And that's sparked concerns about the independence of the central bank under reform. We'll be talking about that and much more after the break. Stay tuned.
I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories.
This is insane.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back. Now, Reform UK's leadership team have held their first formal meeting with the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey. And there has been speculation in the lead up to that Nigel Farage and Richard Tice were heading to Threadneedle Street to do a Trump. You may remember, of course, he continues to threaten, in fact, the head of the US Federal Reserve if he doesn't cut interest rates. While that didn't happen today, it has led to questions about whether the bank would continue to operate independently under any reform government. Our data and economics editor, Ed Conway, has been looking at this for us.
Nigel Farage and Richard Tice have been in to see the Bank of England governor, and a lot of people have been wondering, is this an assault on Bank of England independence? But I think actually there's something more interesting going on. To some extent, reform have a point here. This all comes back to what's known as quantitative tightening. It's a terrible word for quite a big deal. What the Bank of England is doing right now to reverse some of the crisis-era policies it had, buying up loads of government bond, buying it off banks, and as a result of that, they're paying a certain amount of interest to those banks on what are known as reserves. Now, for a long time, Reform have said, we're not really sure this is a very good idea. And to be honest with you, most other political parties, including Labour, including Conservatives, they haven't just wanted to touch this at all. They've said, there's no point in talking about it. But Reform say we do need to talk about it. And that's one of the things that they've been in to see the bank about. Here's what Richard Tice had to say.
We need to debate this in Parliament, and then the related issue of whether or not to be doing quantitative tightening, and we have a very clear position that we shouldn't be doing that. That is increasing the cost of government borrowing, it's triggering taxpayer losses, and the Chancellor needs all the help that she can get. That's why Parliament needs to debate it, discuss it, and not be afraid of it.
Now, what his big idea is that at the moment the bank is paying billions of pounds in reserves interest out to all those high street banks that were involved in the quantitative easing programme. It's like I say, it's incredibly complex, but the upshot of it is they're getting quite a lot of money in interest payments, and it's coming from the state, it's coming from the central bank. Richard Tice says, no, you shouldn't be doing that, we should be using the money elsewhere. The counter-argument, and I think it is a decent counter-argument, is that's kind of like imposing a tax on the banks. And if someone is going to do that, I mean, it's a reasonable kind of argument, but if someone is going to do that, it shouldn't be the Bank of England, it should be the Treasury. But I think where Richard Tice does have a point is that most of the other parties aren't really talking about this. It's only really Reform which is talking about it, and this is something we should be debating. Whether or not you think he's right, and like I said, I think there's some big question marks about that, this is something we should be talking about, given just how big are the sums and the fact that it affects all of us.
You know when I said earlier that every day is a school day? It definitely always is with Ed Conway, but he's a good teacher, he's a good teacher. Let's bring in Salma and Hannah again. What do you think? Do you think Reform have got a point on this?
Well, first of all, I just want to say, let's all calm down. It was just a meeting. You know, most MPs can go in and speak to the Governor of the Bank of England.
It's quite significant in the sense that I think this wouldn't have happened, you know, if Reform were doing so well in the polls, etc., etc., etc.
But they have 5 parliamentarians. They still have every right to speak to the Governor of the Bank of England. And here is why. This is why it's important. Yes, the debate is actually an interesting one, and they are raising an interesting point. But the independence of the Bank of England means that whilst the Treasury and the government has a responsibility for appointing a governor, the governor is actually accountable to Parliament and the public. So we actually need to get clear about what are those mechanisms within Parliament with Reform's 5 MPs, if they do want to debate this topic, how are they tabling that? Because I'm sure that there are lots of Conservatives and indeed people in other political parties who would be interested in this question and probably would share some of Richard Tice's concerns on this.
Hannah, do you think, though, that the Independence Bank of England, what was that, 97, it was, you know, the Blair government's first new thing, Gordon Brown's big idea, etc., etc. Maybe do we need kind of greater scrutiny or different mechanisms? Because, let's be honest, the Bank of England have definitely not got everything right, I think it's fair to say, in the last decade or so, particularly around COVID and inflation and all that sort of stuff. Maybe we do need, not necessarily to get rid of its independence, but maybe to have a bit more oversight. I don't know.
I think there's a fundamental point here, and it's how Reform are managing to steal the agenda, lead the agenda, jump on issues that, haven't been debated extensively. And this comes down to, in some ways, the boring structures of Parliament, and Thelma will know this as well, that sometimes it is actually quite difficult to scrutinise particular issues. But what they are doing is that they're taking it out of the parliamentary forum and, you know, using this kind of voice that they now have within the media and pushing on issues that are quite complex, but ultimately those bonds were bought at a high, they're being sold at a low, and that's having a profound impact on the economy. Of course, that should be discussed. What my concern is, though, yes, about the independence, but also about the other issues that they are discussing. So the thing that hasn't had much coverage today is the fact that they were talking about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, and that's something that Nigel Farage has personally invested in. He's been open about that. They've also just started discussing the fact that they want to do party fundraising with Bitcoin, and that's something that he proposes to be much more relaxed on if he gets into number 10. Now, these are all things that we should be very concerned about, but ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, he's managed to jump on an issue that is quite complex, so people haven't really been talking about, and he's been able to get, you know, coverage around.
But actually, it's the simplicity of the issue. Richard Tice is talking about something that most people will be concerned about. We're paying back a lot of money at a time where we have a massive crunch and where there's a black hole. And it's perfectly reasonable for them to look at other things. My point is that we should, Parliament, who the Bank of England is accountable to,
could do
better.
This. Well, there you go. OK, thank you very much indeed, watching the Politics Hub. We're actually going to Washington, D.C. next and talking to Ireland's Foreign Minister. He's told Sky News his relationship with the US is deeper than any one person in the White House. We'll be talking to Simon Harris after the break. Welcome back to the Politics Hub on this Thursday evening. Now, Ireland's Foreign Minister has said that his country's relationship with America is deeper than any one person in the White House. The Taoiseach, Simon Harris, is in Washington for trade talks and to open a new embassy. And he's told Sky News that it was important to be able to speak truth in a respectful way. It all comes as Conor McGregor, do you remember him? That MMA fighter? Well, he visited the White House, the Oval Office, 5 months ago. And he said, Simon Harris, that he represented the worst of Ireland. Well, the Deputy Prime Minister sat down with our very own David Blevins a little earlier.
Taoiseach, the UK government is attempting to maintain its special relationship with the US by flattering Donald Trump with state visits. What's Ireland's tactic for maintaining its special relationship?
Well, our intention is to continue to constructively engage with a partner who we have a very long established relationship with here in the United States of America, and really to highlight the fact that it is a relationship from an economic point of view that is mutually beneficial. So during my visit to DC today and to the United States this week, we'll be making the point that Ireland, a country with a population around the size of South Carolina, is the 5th largest foreign direct investor into the United States of America. We'll be publishing data that shows in every single state in the United United States. There are Irish companies creating American jobs.
That's very diplomatic language, and we would expect that from a foreign affairs minister. But how do you really make an impact when this White House is rolling out the red carpet for people like Conor McGregor, one of your most fierce critics, and people like Elon Musk are endorsing him?
Well, Conor McGregor represents the very worst of us and doesn't represent Irish values. So it'd be very clear on that. But we in Ireland have always found a way of constructively working with successive US administrations, and that's continuing. We also speak truth to our friends, and we do it in a respectful way. And when we agree, we say it, and when we disagree, we're not afraid to say that too.
So are you saying the relationship transcends whoever happens to be in the White House at any given moment in time?
Absolutely. I mean, the relationship is deeper than any one person. The relationship is hundreds of years old. But we have a constructive relationship with the Trump administration. Our Taoiseach has had good engagements with President Trump as well, and we want to continue to constructively engage with the administration on issues of mutual benefit and mutual interest to both our countries.
You've been at the UN this week. Ireland was one of the first countries to recognise a Palestinian state, 18 months before the UK. President Trump says that is rewarding Hamas and endangering the lives of Israeli hostages. Is it?
No, it's not. And I think the fact that a number of countries moved to recognise Palestine this week, including the United Kingdom, is a very, very welcome development. But what I'm more concerned about now is actually how we end the genocide, how we end the killing, how we end the famine, and how we crucially see the release of all the hostages as well. And there was very, very good work done this week at the United Nations, the New York Declaration, showing a roadmap forward where there is no future for Hamas. In Gaza. That's very clear. The Arab countries are clear in relation to that. The European Union is clear in relation to that. Clearly, the United States is clear in relation to that too. So recognition is important. It tells the people of Palestine, we see you. We believe that two states exist, and you can't have a two-state solution without recognising two states.
The other big talking point right now, of course, is Ukraine. Ireland has always been militarily neutral, but given the threat that Russia now poses to Europe and the ever-changing geopolitical landscape, is it time to rethink that?
No, neutrality is something we very much value in Ireland, but I think understanding what neutrality is also important. It means we're militarily unaligned. It means we don't join military alliances. It does not mean, though, that we sit on the sidelines when it comes to standing up for territorial integrity, the UN Charter, international law. It's why this week I announced €35 million more in humanitarian assistance for Ukraine. It's why we're participating in the coalition of the willing. And if we get to the point of a peace agreement, we're willing to engage on trying to provide peacekeepers to the region, should that be appropriate as well.
Right now, there's a lot of focus on political violence in the United States. You yourself and your family have been subjected to some very serious and graphic threats. How has that affected you and your ability to do your job? I mean, is holding political office worth the risk?
So I think you can never be bullied out of political office, because it's not about me or it's not about any individual. It's about our democracy and the core concept of democracy. And people who wish to operate in the shadows, people who wish to operate behind anonymous accounts, be they in Ireland or be they abroad, should never be allowed to interfere in the democracy of a country. On a human level, of course, when this visits any of us, we have to dig deep to carry on. There's no doubt about that. And we all obviously put our families first. But we really have to have a very honest and real conversation about the toxicity that now exists in political discourse, or what is described as political discourse. I love a good old robust debate. I love it. I enjoy it. That's what politics is about, debating and discussing ideas with people who have different opinions. But that is a world apart from threatening violence, kidnapping, and other horrific threats on people's families.
Taoiseach, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
There you go, Simon Harris speaking to David Blevins a little earlier from Washington, D.C. OK, you're watching the Politics Hub. Up next, with Barack Obama packing out arenas in both London and Dublin this week, we'll be looking at the very slight contrasts in speech style between him and President Trump. That's next.
Tonight from 8 claims that hackers have stolen the pictures, names and addresses of thousands of young children from a chain of nurseries. We'll have the latest for you. Also ahead tonight, we'll discuss the Prime Minister's plans to introduce a compulsory digital ID for all adults. and why Ticketmaster have been forced to change their practices after their handling of the Oasis reunion tour. All that much more to come on the UK Tonight at 8.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force. It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News.
Hey, James.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's U.S. correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Mr. President, what will you say next to Benjamin Netanyahu? In June 2009, did you stay at the apartment in Manhattan of Jeffrey Epstein?
I'm not answering any questions about him.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent. I've interviewed some of America's most recognisable politicians.
Should the Defence Secretary and the Vice...
Wait, what country are you
from? The UK.
Okay, we don't give a crap about your opinion and your reporting.
Mr Walker, you're anti-abortion, but 2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir?
Connor, what did you say to the President? What did you say?
We had a great meeting. He was a great man.
I'm David Blevins, one of Sky's US correspondents, based in Washington, D.C.
David Blevins from Sky News. Fire chiefs say that they're really stretched to the limit and running out of water. What have you got to say to that?
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here.
Why only in America? Why is this American exceptionalism? I just want to understand why you do not think that guns are the problem.
Why is this just an American problem?
The anger too, and the division.
Where are you from? From Sky News, UK.
Yeah.
Back up.
Mr. Navarro,
I'm allowed to ask questions, aren't I?
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Vladimir Putin calls you outstanding, Mr. Musk. Has your ego and ignorance cost Ukrainian lives?
David Cameron needs to worry about his own country, and frankly, he can kiss my ass.
Mr. Patel, did you endanger public safety when you said the killer was in custody?
Free wherever you get your news.
What words do you have for Harry Dunn's family today?
Have a nice day.
Do you fear a fourth indictment?
Welcome back. Now, we always like to have a bit of fun at the end of the programme. And tonight we're going to focus on Barack Obama and Donald Trump, because Barack Obama's actually been on this side of the pond this week, addressing an audience in London last night. And today he's been awarded the Freedom of the City of Dublin. And I think it's fair to say that he strikes a very different figure from the man who succeeded him in office, particularly when it comes to rhetorical flair. Now, Donald Trump did make, as he always does, a pretty memorable address at the UN this week. And so we thought, with both presidents in the spotlight, it'd be a good opportunity to compare and contrast the speech that Mr. Obama made as president to the very same organisation in 2016. Have a watch of this.
Let me recount the progress that we've made these last 8 years.
In a period of just 7 months, I have ended 7 unendable wars. They said they were unendable.
And it could not have happened had we not worked together.
And sadly, in all cases, the United Nations did not even try to help in any of them. These are the 2 things I got from the United Nations: a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter.
We can choose to press forward with a better model of cooperation and integration, or we can retreat into a world sharply divided.
Getting stuck on the escalator.
Today, a nation ringed by walls would only imprison itself. Instead, we must work together to make sure the benefits of such integration are broadly shared.
Europe is in serious trouble. They've been invaded by a force of illegal aliens like nobody's ever seen before.
But I do not believe progress is possible if our desire to preserve our identities gives way to an impulse to dehumanize or dominate another group.
Your countries are going to hell.
That's why we need to follow through on our efforts to combat climate change.
Climate change. It's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world. The carbon footprint is a hoax.
It's difficult to spend on foreign assistance. But I do not believe this is charity.
I mean, you're much closer to this. We have an ocean in between. You're right there. and Europe has to step it up.
If we start resorting to trade wars, market-distorting subsidies, beggar-thy-neighbor policies, an over-reliance on natural resources instead of innovation, these approaches will make us poor collectively, and they are more likely to lead to conflict.
That's why the United States is now applying tariffs to other countries.
I recognize not every country in this hall is going to follow the same model of governance. I do not think that America can or should impose our system of government on other countries.
And I don't say that in a braggadocious way, but it's true. I've been right about everything. I'm really good at this stuff.
He's really good at this stuff. Salma and Hannah are still here. I mean, it's not just what they have to say, it's obviously the way they say it. I mean, there is such a stark contrast.
Can I just say, first and foremost, imagine being a translator. Well, either of them, to be honest, because President Obama is actually very flowery in terms of his language, very poetic, and then Trump is very sort of abrupt in it. I often think, what the translators, how are they doing that?
What was that boastful word he used?
Braggadocious.
Braggadocious. The thing that stood out for me was Trump was all me, and actually Obama was very we. He was much more inclusive in his language. Bringing people together.
Think about it this way, though. So politics has now become a form of entertainment, OK? We have sort of, crossed the divide, or crossed the Rubicon.
Through the looking glass.
Yeah, exactly, where politics is a little bit more entertainment. And whilst Obama was saying things incredibly well, there is a certain audience for which that does not make any sense. There's assuming a lot of knowledge. I know he's speaking to the UN.
Can I make a profound point here?
Please.
Which actually is that those two speeches reflected the change in America,
Yeah.
where America's gone from we to the rest of the world to being very introvert and going me, America first again. Actually, that's why the speeches are so good in some senses.
And I think that reflects a very profound shift, and also what does that mean for the rest of the world? I think that's the kind of key question around Trump is looking so inward, and there will be lots of people that will be attractive to. But for the Democrats, they had failed abjectly to get their message across, and they still are failing to do that.
We've got about 30 seconds left. Genuinely, I really mean this. They've got very different styles, and I know Barack Obama's held up as the greatest speaker of our political generation, but who is better? I mean, who is better at connecting and...
Listen,
I don't know, because in some ways Trump is very impressive at it too.
I actually find Trump very engaging, but I think there is a question as to whether you want to be entertained by the president and the leader of the free world, or whether you want to be informed by him.
Hannah?
I'm afraid Trump gives me the creeps.
Okay.
And I was a big admirer of Obama, and I've been in the room when he's been speaking, and it is phenomenal.
OK. Hannah and Salma, it's been an absolute pleasure tonight. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on the Politics Hub. And that is it from me for tonight. Sophy will be back on Monday. She'll be live from Labour Party Conference in Liverpool. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee. Do stay tuned for that and have a great weekend. Goodbye.